management of sorry, I got something off the screen there. Okay, so so literally this group of parents decided that in that particular school they were taking away the duty and work of the teacher librarian in deciding what books would be in the library. And they basically signed a caveat which was not part at all of the school district policies pertaining to weeding and challenges in the system. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to give themselves permission to remove any book that had to do with magic, among others at the time, the Harry Potter books. They wanted to remove, and again, this was a long time ago, when we still had things that were not in computer form. They wanted to remove the N, in the series of books that we have, they wanted to remove the N's because it contained the words naked and nude in it. And I mean, why would you want to do that? But, and then they also wanted to remove anything pertaining to students reading that dealt with lust in teenage books in high school, which would be removing a ton of books in a high school library. Because that is a lot of discussion pertaining to that, falling in love at the high school level. So when I sat down with them, and I was asked to come in, so I came and I sat down, and the parents said, well, we have the right as parents to do that. And I said, well, not really, because there are policies in place. The district said, well, you can't say that this is censorship because there is no clear definition of censorship. So we looked around at the time. I was with the CLA, and we found basically at the time the best concept of what censorship was, and it was from the Canadian Journalists for Free Expression. And that censorship is typically considered to be the removal or blocking of information, speech, or expression. It also includes self-censorship, where the individual or organizations limit what they say for fear of repercussions. And so using that, we were able to gain a cause. The other thing with school districts, obviously, is that they are a public entity like public libraries and academic libraries, but the big difference is that they don't particularly like the press. They don't like being in the news. So in the end, the argument that we had is that the parents said, why don't you just let us do what we want in the school? And I said, well, we're both going to become famous because I'm definitely going to go to the press. And so they backed down, and the school district backed down, and the caveat was removed, and they decided to continue following the policy, which is good. Okay, so the Canadian Federation of Library Association holds that libraries, obviously a key institution in Canada for rendering expressive contents. Libraries, obviously an essential gateway for all persons living in Canada. We take this as a great value as Canadians. In accordance with established library policies, procedures, and due process, we should resist, efforts to limit the exercise of these responsibilities while recognizing the right of criticism by individuals. And that's fine. People can criticize documents and items in a library, whatever the type of library. The difficulty is for them to go in and say, basically, I want this removed. Now, library employees, volunteers, and employers, as well as the library governing entities, have a core responsibility to uphold the principles of intellectual freedom in the performance of their respective library role, which is something that, based on everything that I've seen in the 20 plus years that I've worked in the advocacy of intellectual freedom, I could say that as Canadians, we certainly value this, and librarians, teacher librarians, academic librarians, all work very hard in basically recognizing that access to libraries and information is important. Okay, so censorship can happen anywhere. So basically, one of the things that we always recommend, and regretfully, there are smaller school districts in Canada that have no specific documents, a request for reconsideration of Library Learning Commons resources. It's a process in place to meet with concerned parties and the possibility of a consensus decision made with teacher librarian input. In School District 36, which is the biggest school district in Western Canada, It has a specific section on dealing with library learning commons censorship issues. It's District Regulation 8800.2. Learning resources challenges can be found at the address I have there. The document includes an organogram of the individual who should be involved and the necessary forms. Now, even if you have something as good as Surrey has, Durham also is another school district in Ontario, and they had the same thing. The difficulty with the Durham School District is that they also put in a new policy pertaining to protecting First Nations issues within the school district. Two parents came in and had some issues with a book written by Robertson Davis, who was a Cree First Nations writer, and the director of instruction, rather than following all the great policies they have in place, basically removed the books. Now, somebody contacted Mr. Robertson. He contacted the publisher of his book. They contacted the district, and the district ignored them. So what he did after that is he went to the press and he went on social media saying, why have these books been removed? Because they refused to do it. I participated as the chair of the Intellectual Freedom Committee at their board meeting back in March. The trustees were all taken by surprise. They didn't know that a book could simply be removed on the say-so of only one person in the district. In the end, the book was put back into the library, and they said there would be an evaluation. To my knowledge, this was back in April. They haven't done anything, and the book simply remains in the school libraries in the Durham School District. But the whole idea is that in going public, the school district had to respond to why they had it. And in this particular case, they never have issued a reason as to why the books were removed. I know there were complaints. Specifically, they stated that there were some complaints about the books, but these are award-winning books that are all over Canada. There's never been any criticism of these particular books by Mr. Robertson, and yet the books were taken out on the say-so of two parents in a school district of 26,000 students. Okay, so challenges and types. Obviously, there's two fronts: outside challenges by parents in specific groups, and we'll talk more about that, and challenges from within. That means some of the school boards, district personnel, administrative teachers, and even from teacher librarians. There are some teacher librarians who have different views, and sometimes they want to remove material. Basically the type of challenges: there's content, curriculum, genre, and book leveling. So censorship issues in BC Library Learning Commons based on content in the last 5 years have dealt mostly with LGBTQ, SOGI 123 resources, and books like drama, Being Jazz, Magic, Harry Potter series, horror, Twilight, and Lust. Any book where teenagers fall in love. Other series that have been challenged in recent years include books like Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants and the Shopaholic series. In these particular books, it's basically poor image of the young ladies who are in the stories. They're not seen as good people. One of the most important court cases pertaining to library learning commons, I'm sure everybody in this group has heard about, was the Surrey book case. That was in the early 2000s. One Dad, Two Dads, Brown Dads, Blue Dads by Johnny Valentine, Asha's Mum by Rosamund Elwin, and Morris Pulse, and Belinda's Bouquet by Leslie Newman and Michael Wilhote. In 1997, James Chamberlain, who was a teacher at the time in an elementary school, submitted 3 books for board approval to use in his grade 1 class. In grade 1 in the curriculum in BC, they introduced families, and he wanted to introduce the concept of alternate families. The request ended up being challenged. The board in Surrey absolutely did not want these books to be used. They considered families to be just mom, dad, and children. So it went all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, and on December 21st, they had a ruling. They ruled basically that the ban on books about gay and lesbian parents had no place in public library systems, and a library system that claims to promote diversity and tolerance. Chief Beverly McLean wrote in the 7-2 ruling that parental views, however important, cannot override the imperative placed upon the British Columbia schools to mirror diversity and community and teach tolerance. So that was very important. The other thing is, she stressed the importance of secular school boards to avoid caving into pressure from religious parents to the point of excluding the values of other members of the community. Chief Justice Beverly McLean dismissed the board's concern that children would be confused or misled by classroom information about same-sex parents. And she pointed out tolerance is always age appropriate. Children cannot learn unless they are exposed to views that differ from those they are taught at home. Okay, and one thing that was very important for school libraries, it had important implication and still does to this day, is that she said that the distinction between actions and belief is present in Canada's constitutional case law. Persons are entitled to hold such beliefs as they choose, but their ability to act on them, whether in the private or public sphere, may be narrower. And a good example with that was back in 2019, the Ottawa School Board, the Ottawa Catholic School Board. A parent came in, and again, the book Drama. In the book Drama, it has to do with something that happens in the school. And in one scene in the book, two young boys kiss. And based on that one incident within the whole framework of a whole book that has a whole complete different story based only on that 2 seconds of two boys kissing, I went into the school and asked that the book be removed because she did not want her kids or any kids in that school to have access to it. The librarian referred the parent to the document that if she wanted it for removed, she had to sign this and she had to go. The parent refused. The parent went to the board and asked to speak to the superintendent, and the superintendent basically put out an email to everybody in the district saying that all the drama books all across the district had to be removed. Again, the teacher librarians in the district and parents also who supported the teacher librarians basically went to the press. It went to the CBC News, and by the next day, the school board backed down, said that's not what they meant. That's not what they were hoping to do. That's not. They just wanted the book removed for review. That's not what the email of the superintendent said. But the book was returned. And to my knowledge, again, the situation was dropped and the books remained in the library. There have been instances in genre, okay, where a group of parents have requested that certain genre books be removed. Okay, so this is the one I talked about earlier. The parents presented a list of book genres they requested be removed from a library learning commons. They included art books, photography books, because they believe that art books and photography books were not good for children. Dark horror, evil books, and books that deal with teenage lust or certain recurring swearing. So what we did is basically she did not want the teacher librarian at that school to weed an entire collection based on a small group of parents' requests versus the entire population of the school. A grievance was launched. Again, because the situation is different in school libraries, we can launch grievances as teacher librarians because it infringes upon our work if somebody from the exterior tells us how to do our job. So the support of Canadian Association for School Libraries, the local teacher librarians group, the resources from the BCLA, which was very important, the BC Teacher Librarians Association, and the Canadian Library Association at the time, basically told the parents that we were going to support the teacher librarian of the school. And finally, the school and the school board backed away from it. Okay. Another important challenge, and this one is not something that you see in public libraries or academic libraries, but another important challenge occurred in an elementary school where the administration decided to book level everything in the school, including the book room where they have readers for classes, and even the classroom collections for the teachers. Now, leveling a book in a school basically is you're saying that only kids who are a certain age can read certain books. So it basically made it impossible for kids to read anything above or beyond or below their level. They only had a certain number of books, and any books that could not be evaluated to be for a specific age group were simply removed. Okay, so 2 grievances were launched because of that. The first dealt with the removal weeding of books from the library learning commons. The second one dealt with teacher autonomy. In asking that the teachers, these are books that were bought by the teachers. The principal wanted the books removed from the classrooms and she was going to dispose of them. They are not the district's books. They were the teachers' books that they bought with their own money. So that basically said the school administration had been asked to stop removing books from the library. No one told the library tech or parent volunteers to stop weeding the library learning commons, so it continued. And this is when I came in. I was coming in to see a teacher for something different, but this is what I saw on tables. These were all the books that were being discarded, okay? And they continued. So the next week, everything in dark is what was there before, everything in color. So they continued for a whole week and they were speeding up the process to try to get rid as much as possible. What I also didn't know is that they had removed some books before and they had taken them and sent them away. After an inventory, and I requested an inventory, it was determined that 5,000 books had been weeded from the Library Learning Commons collection in over 2 years. 30 boxes of books were found ready to be incinerated. So the grievance was settled. The board basically did not really know, I think, what was happening in the school or the number of books that were being thrown away. But the board basically committed to having in place a request for reconsideration form that would prevent any further opportunity for one person to remove books from a school library learning commons without a consensus or district policy. Okay. Freedom to read and choose what to read is at the heart of our library learning commons programs across Canada, and which it means to be what, and that's what it means to be a reader in BC schools. What is not in question is that we all want students to read because they love to read for pleasure and information, not because they want to move to a higher book level. So this is very important. Now, there should be leveled book readers in a library learning commons. We don't deny that. Just not every book in the school, not every book in the book room, for which are collections of books for classrooms to read, and certainly not the collection of books that a teacher has bought for herself, for her students to read. Despite some flaws in how books are rated, having a level is a way to ensure that a student is understanding what they're reading. Providing levels to keep the continuity of leveled books in the classroom and makes things uniform across the school. So it's okay to have some, it's just not to have it. Now, the BCTLA came out with some concerns about level books. There's a rightful place for level books and guides for helping students choose appropriate readers, but there are also some associated concerns. There's no scientifically proven research-based process for accurately leveling books, okay? When a teacher is in charge of the decision-making, student choice and freedom to choose, okay, reading motivators at all levels are absent and delayed. In some schools, teacher librarians and teachers are only allowed to have students check out books on their reading level, again, which the BCTLA disagrees with. We can send the wrong message to students. Restricting students to a leveled reader is not a good idea, okay? So the recommendations on that particular one is do not underestimate curiosity, passion, and interest as a motivator. Once kids go to a public library, they take out whatever books they want. This is kind of the same thing. Even if a student can't read the whole book, it's important that they take out a book of interest. That's, I think, the aim of teacher librarians. If they need a book specific to be leveled, that's another issue pertaining to some of the reading they do in the classroom. But on their own personal interest, they should be able to take out any book they want within the framework of the age-appropriate level that they have in schools. Okay, use level books in moderation and with caution, and offer relevant texts, mostly of their own choosing. All students deserve a chance to read what they want. And this is the BCTLA statement on book leveling. Okay, the practice of leveling book use to support guide reading in classroom is not consistent with the values of teacher librarians and should not be applied in part or in whole to a school library collection. It's okay to have the books set apart for students to read, but we shouldn't necessarily level collections, whether located in a school or classroom libraries, inhibit the use of authentic strategies for selection and directly contradict the message of pursuing reading for the interest and passion. Okay, and censorship within Over a decade ago, a teacher librarian in BC filed a human rights complaint against a school district here in the Lower Mainland. Excuse me. And school administrator, based on their personal beliefs. The teacher librarian was basically removing all the LGBTQ books from the library learning commons. And when asked to desist, refused and went to the BC Human Rights Tribunal, saying that it affected her beliefs to have LGBTQ books in the library. The teacher librarian had issues of dealing with these books about alternate families. The Human Rights Tribunal determined that the teacher librarian's case was without merit and dismissed her complaint. Okay, most pressures for censorship in library learning commons come from parents who disapprove of language or ideas that differ from personal values, but other challenges emerge. A good example of that would be, what would it be? I can't remember right now. I'll have to think about that. But any book, even if it's a children's book, and if they have an ampersand and stuff like that, that indicate that the character is swearing, even though he's not swearing, the interesting thing about that is that parents say that's swearing, and we're supposed to teach students not to swear. So if in a cartoon book or something like that, somebody has a hammer dropped on their toe and they swear, they say that that's inappropriate language for students. The most common types of library challenge in the last 5 years are based on materials that dealt with sexuality, religion, race, and ethnicity, and obviously age appropriateness. Excuse me. Other issues that have been obviously taken into in Canada, the teaching of Darwin's theory of evolution in science classes because it conflicts with their own religious views. Others think schools are wrong to allow discussions about sexual orientation. The SOGI 123, family life classes would like to, and others would like to eliminate the adventures of Huckleberry Finn from the English curriculum because of its racist language. So these are some of the challenges that we've had. Censorship based on individual sensitivity and concerns restrict the knowledge available to students. Some parents oppose having their children exposed to fiction that does not have happy endings. That's another thing that we deal with, especially in K-7 schools, that teach a moral lesson or provide noble role models. If there are other individual preferences that are legitimate criteria, it would narrow it down to its least controversial and probably least relevant. If we take away everything that parents don't want in libraries or groups, if they want everything removed, there would hardly be anything worth reading in libraries. And that's the concern that we have. And that's why it's important for us to stand up and fight these challenges. Okay, now the big thing that has occurred, obviously, is that in the United States, there's been different types of challenges. Women for Liberty is a group in Texas who's basically been challenging LGBTQ material for trans and LGBTQ children, and they want all of it removed. And what they have been doing with tacit approval from politicians is they are basically sending letters to school districts accusing them of basically putting out pornography or obscene material for students. Now, Women for Liberty came into Canada. They've been training a group here in Canada called Action for Canada, who has then done the same thing. Now, in the last municipal election in 2018, there was an introduction of SOGI 123 in public schools. It was challenged by some parents and groups. One group was Culture Guard. They challenged the implementation of SOGI 123. It was used as a political platform. 12 candidates ran in the municipal election as trustees in 2018. 3 were elected. Parents and groups in certain districts demanded that school boards rescind the implementation of the program and the removal of offending resources. Among others, Chilliwack here in BC was the most active in trying to remove SOGI 123 from the schools. So even though the BC Ministry of Education policy allows parents the flexibility to have their children participate and not participate in sensitive areas of the curriculum. So if there was a concern about something that was being taught in SOGI 123, the parents had the right to tell the administration and the teacher that they would be sent to the library or another place where they wouldn't have to listen to that day's activity. So the groups in opposition these days are now better organized. As I said, they're getting training from the United States and using the same playbook as the one used in certain American states. This includes accusing the school library or learning commons of peddling pornography or obscene materials to children, with LGBTQIA2+ resources made available to districts for the program. One such group, as I said, is Action for Canada. They're situated in Surrey, BC. The group, after the 2021-22 school year, right after the end of the school year, sent a notice of personal liability, facilitating an exposure of minors to sexually explicit material, activities, and/or events to school districts. The letter is divided into 3 sections: an explanation of what they want, the laws that are included, and the request. The interesting thing is that right away, what we did at the CFLA when this came out is we sought information. And one of the groups that we worked with was the CFE has lawyers, pro bono lawyers, and they took a look at it and they said this document that was being sent by this particular group wasn't worth the legality of the paper that they had in it. It doesn't mean anything. To receive a letter that has a law in it doesn't mean that you've broken that law. And it was important for us to tell everybody that's the reality of it. It's not worth the paper it's written on to have somebody say this is pornography. They would have to go in court. They would have to prove it. This document was not written by a lawyer. It's not a specific document that challenges the school district, other than the fact that it's kind of a scare tactic. Now, the big difference between Canada and the United States is that in Canada, in the US, a lot of politicians agreed with this type of letter and started removing all of the books on the LGBTQ community and programs that they had in their schools. In Canada, that's not what's happened. In Canada, it's been very, very different. Okay, so what have we done? A Canadian response. The BCTLA and CFE worked to prepare useful information for all teacher librarians in public schools. The CFLA posted a document on the intellectual freedom and notice of personal liability and how to respond to it. This includes position statements on documents from the CFE and CFLA. And basically, one was guidelines and position paper statements on intellectual freedom in libraries. The information was sent regarding contacting local teacher unions in BC. So we sent information to the BCTLA and BCTF. The BCTF responded by sending information to all the school districts saying this is the type of letter that you might be receiving. We also sent the our committee, Intellectual Freedom Committee, contacted both Master of Library and Information Studies program in Canada, and at the U of A, they have a master's in teaching librarianship and related librarian programs across the country. We requested that they incorporate this information in any course they offer in intellectual freedom, which they did. Our library policies with the issue. Instructors in the diploma in teacher librarianship at the University of British Columbia were also contacted. A short lesson was created by the instructors in that program on the notice of personal liability and how to deal with it, and it was incorporated into the courses offered. Lessons were also used in the courses during the academic year that's ongoing now. So we went away and did a lot of thinking about how we would do this. So our first thought was to inform as many people as possible. So that is what we've done, and the response was great. Among other things, the Ministry of Education responded, which is something that we wanted. And again, in the United States, the reaction is that most state, especially in Texas, Florida, and a lot of southern states, the education state boards basically sided with the parents and asked that all of this materials be removed. In the Ministry of Education here in BC, they put out a statement in support of the SOGI program being taught in BC schools that included classroom and library learning commons, and not just from them. We also had the Minister of Education, BC School Trustees Association, BC School Superintendents, BC Association of School Business Officials, BC Principals and Vice Principals Association, the BCTF, CUPE, BC Confederation of Parent Advisory Councils, Federation of Independent School Association, the ARC Foundation, First Nations Education Steering Committee, First Nations Schools Association, and the Métis Nation of BC all released the same document in support of the BCTF, of the BCTLA, against the challenge basically from this parent group here in Surrey. After the BC Ministry of Education response to the threats, the BC Teacher Librarians Association also responded with the support of several librarianship groups in BC, and they posted it out all across the province at the start of the school year. Now, what happened with that? Some of the people who were out there, Mr. Neufeld, who was one of the leaders of the anti-trans movement and LGBTQ movement in BC, and everyone else who ran against the SOGI 123 program in BC lost their election as trustees in BC, all of them. So I guess the message was out there, I think the support in BC was strong enough that parents thought better than electing somebody who was against a program that talked about different types of family in BC. So I'll leave out the politics and all that, but I think it is interesting to see that in the last election in 2018, there were some that were elected. Anybody who was elected in 2018 was not reelected in 2022. Okay, so what is our role as teacher librarians and librarians? It's to understand that sometimes parents have issues and concern with books that their children bring home to read. That's obvious. While challenging reading content is a parent's prerogative, removing access to a book for the library learning commons and for all other students in the school is more problematic. And that's what we're trying to tell parents. We absolutely understand that you have a concern with this book and you'd rather your child not read it. That is fine, but removing it for everybody else in the school is a different issue. Okay, we value our democratic and charter rights, hope we can resolve book challenges to the satisfaction of all concerned, but the fact is people have sought to limit access to the public in general and children specifically to books in library learning commons, public libraries, and even bookstores. And I don't know if you've heard of that, but in the United States, in a state like Virginia, there's a group of people who are working together to remove all kinds of books from libraries. Among other things, not only are they accusing the teacher librarians and teachers in the school of being peddling pornography, but they're also suing the school districts for having the people put these books in the library, and they're also suing the book companies that are selling the books to the school districts. So they're going after everybody who has anything to do with the creation of these books. That hasn't happened in Canada yet, to my knowledge. We sometimes find ourselves confronted by parents or directed by administrators or district to remove items from a library learning commons. As an example, the ones I gave in Durham and the one in Ottawa. Okay, in some cases, the argument is made that it only affects one school. So why make a fuss? Well, the simple answer is that it does. Whether a challenge happens in one school or one district, it matters to the library learning commons and teacher librarians in Canada. The removal of any item from a library learning commons anywhere in the country could and can bring about challenges elsewhere. So we work on all of them, even if it's a small school district in a small place removed. We always rise up to the challenge and assist the teacher librarians in those schools if they have concerns. What to do? Well, the best thing that we tell everybody is to be proactive. Make sure that at the start of each school year, district policies for library learning commons are up to date, or that they should have one. And the other is to address the issue in a constructive manner. Okay, it's important that we don't get mad. It's important that we don't overreact. It's important that we tell everybody that there are documents in place and statements in place that can be used to reinforce the argument to follow the district process. Okay, as soon as a challenge emerges, this is what we tell teacher librarians. Meeting with the parent or administrator expressing a concern is important. The purpose of this meeting is to air all side concerns, resolve the situation before it heats up, confront the challenge, but avoid being confrontational. Immediately refer to the Canadian Charter of Rights and threatening and threatening a grievance seldom encourages a productive discussion. Listen to the administrator or the parent's objections. Be open to creative compromises. Sometimes a book is not necessarily removed from the library, but is tagged for older kids, if that's possible. Okay. So if there are any questions about district or parental rights to remove a book without following the process, here are some of the documents we tell teacher librarians and teachers to deal with. BC has a school act, basically. Section 76, all provincial schools must be conducted on strictly secular and non-sectarian principles. The highest morality must be inculcated, but no religious dogma or creed is to be taught in a provincial school. BC Civil Liberties Association. Sorry, my granddaughter. Okay. So, for example, evidence of widespread concern sufficient to invoke the process could be presented in a petition. It should not be enough for the subjective views of one person to invoke the expensive and time-consuming process. Evidence of communal concern is, of course, not enough in itself to prohibit any particular material to be removed. Okay, so even though there's a few people in the whole district that think that a book needs to be removed, that doesn't necessarily mean it should be. It has to be an example of how the book is viewed by society. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child is another important one. This is one that's very important. In particular, Article 13 is that children have the right to freedom of expression. It includes freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, regardless of frontiers, either orally, in writing, or in print in the form of art. The exercise of this right might be subject to certain restrictions, obviously age group, age appropriate, but they shall only be one that are provided by law and are necessary. Okay. The BC Library Association. It's the responsibility of library administrators and librarians as guardians of the people's freedom to read, to contest the encroachment upon that freedom by individuals or groups seeking to impose their own standards. That's important. The Book and Periodical Council of Canada. Okay, the freedom to choose what we read does not, however, include the freedom to choose for others. We accept that courts alone have the authority to restrict reading materials, a prerogative that cannot be delegated or appropriated. Prior restraint demeans individual responsibility. It is the anathema of freedom and democracy. And so here are some of the things that came out. The CFLA position on statement and diversity inclusion, okay, carried over from the CLA, insists that libraries understand that an acceptance of differences can place individuals and collective values in conflict. Libraries are committed to tolerance and understanding. Libraries act to ensure that people can enjoy services free from any attempts by others to impose values. And finally, important reminders, any censorship challenge in a library learning commons needs to be addressed. A lot of people tried not to deal with it. And it's important that when we talk to teacher librarians, and even when I'm speaking to public librarians or academic librarians, that it needs to be dealt with. Your local colleague, as well as your local provincial and national library associations, are there to support any teacher librarian who is confronted by a challenge. It is in your best interest to contact your provincial association to report any censorship issue. Regretfully, one of the biggest issues we have in Canada is that schools rarely report to the Canadian Federation of Library Associations or any other entity if there's been a censorship challenge. The only time we ever hear about them is when somebody phones us at the CFLA IFC, or if it goes to the public. So the author of the book's been warned, or the publishers of a book have been warned that their book's being removed, and they go to the press. The fastest way of dealing with it is if they go to the press. Usually a school district will back down. But in a sense, for us, it's important that the policies be followed in place and that they get the work done. And that is it. I have a few minutes to answer questions. Sorry, I went through that pretty fast. I'm trying to get out here. Oop. There. Screen is back to you, Debbie.
Yep, there we go. There's everybody up on the screen then. So do we have any questions of Richard? That was Tom.
Yeah, I'm just raising my finger. I'm sorry, I don't know how to use that.
That's fine.
Equivalent. Don't read anything else into it. It struck me as you were finishing, and maybe I should preface this by saying, I went to school in British Columbia. I worked at UBC at another point. I went to school in Alberta, worked at the University of Calgary at another point. So I hope this isn't taken to be, the wrong sort of contribution to interprovincial, whatever. You gave a lot of examples from BC responding and from sort of texts there. How does Alberta tend to respond?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. It's more complicated. I can give you also a lot of examples in Ontario because they have the Ontario Library Association and they have everybody under one umbrella. The Ontario School Library Association is very active. There is no teachers union in Alberta. So it's very different in how they react to these things. And again, the biggest problem that we have, as I stated, even for other school library situations in Canada, is the fact that they're not reported. So if something is happening, okay, we don't hear about it a lot. And in Alberta right now, the situation is interesting politically, I should say. And so I'm not exactly sure how they're going on that situation. We know that some school districts in Alberta have received the same letter of notice of personal liability, but that's all. We know that they have received it. How they've been dealt with, how they're reacting to it, we're not hearing anything. The school districts don't offer a whole lot of information at the best of times, and in BC the same. It's only when teachers or teacher librarians challenge them that it gets out in the open. But in Alberta, I'm sorry to say that we don't have much connection with them because they don't have a teachers union. There are no specific teacher librarian associations that we are connected to. There's teacher librarians association that are very, very active in BC, in Saskatchewan, in Manitoba, in Ontario, in Quebec, and so on and so forth. Alberta, I'm sorry to say, there's just no information really coming out. I'd love to have more information come out. I have family there. We started there, my wife and I, before coming out here. So it's certainly something I take to heart. But when it comes to getting information about what's happening in the schools, it's a bit more complicated. I know that the challenges that I've gone into school, for the few that I've heard about, is that they were dealt with in a way that I think it's kind of similar to what we've done here. It's not worth the paper it's written on. And I'm sure somebody within the district saw that these papers are not worth it. And they also, which is a big advantage, is that we've sent information out to all kinds of different types of libraries and library schools and all that. So I know that the library school at the University of Alberta and also the master's program in teacher librarianship at the University of Alberta is aware. And that particular program has a lot of graduates. They sent out a lot of information to the schools. So hopefully the message is out there, but it's not trickling out the same way as here, where everybody gets together in BC under the umbrella of the BCTLA and the BCLA, and all the information is put out.
Alvin, do you have anything to add to that as an Albertan? No? Okay, just asking. All right, any other questions?
Yes, an observation.
Elizabeth,
Yeah.
can I just, as a former Albertan librarian, I would say one of the very active groups working on the school library front is actually Grant MacEwan College's library technician program, Noreen. Oh my God, Alvin, you're gonna have to help me here because I can't remember Noreen's last name. Is it Jameson, James?
Erickson.
Erickson. Oh, she's changed her name. Okay. They've done a number of workshops and she's actually liaised with the same group you liaise with in Ontario. But they've always been a really good source of what's going on in the school sector in the face of no one good overriding teacher librarian group from the school. So just putting that out there.
Yeah.
Sorry, Elizabeth.
Okay, my observation is from the United States. As a former ALA counselor and life member, basically, like automatic member for ALA, I've been following it with a great deal of disturbance.
Yeah.
Oops.
Oops. Is just me or has everybody lost her?
Because what many schools with public law, not just from the left and the right, but also a concerted attempt, for example, to remove all books that would be authored by or talking about particularly Black
Yeah.
characters. And it is particularly egregious because the feeling that I get is they would like to go back to books that are vanilla,
Yeah.
that say nothing about the Civil War because that might upset white kids.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a huge attack from that side. And then, of course, as mentioned, on the other side, you've got these people who want to regulate language and just listen to a far left, if I would say that, of what transgender people would like. In other words, they don't want the use of women.
Yeah.
And you've got all of these attacks landing at the same time on both the school libraries and the public libraries. And they're being defunded right now.
Yeah.
Librarians are leaving in droves. In Florida, DeSantis had all books removed from individual schoolrooms, like the teachers' personal collections,
Yeah.
to be reviewed to see if they were basically vanilla and would hurt no one. So folks, if that's what's coming up here, it is extremely dangerous.
Well, hopefully it won't. In pertaining to that, I know that the ALA is doing some really great work in keeping tabs on this. So we're quite impressed. They're coming out with a special issue of the ALA magazine sometime early next year. I was invited by Tony Samick, who's a professor at the University of Alberta in their School of Librarianship, and we wrote an article together that we submitted. What they wanted was a perspective on what's happening in Canada versus everything that's happening. If you ever get a chance to read the ALA journal specific to what's happening in the United States, there will be a chapter in there explaining what's happening in Canada.
I have a feeling you may not be able to get access to it unless you're an ALA member, but I could be wrong about that. That used to be the case.
Yeah. We have, in my perspective, if I may be permitted to end, we have, and I've been involved with a lot of great people, Alvin, among others, who's there, I worked with and still do. The important thing to hear in Canada is that we have stood our ground. It hasn't been easy. And as much as we do have some more right than right, left-leaning governments now and more left than left-leaning governments in Canada, there's still a perspective as Canadians that we don't have to eliminate everything like they're trying to do in the United States. As much as everybody's talking about LGBTQ, and like you said, in Florida, you can't even say the word gay in school anymore. Santa's put out a law, don't say gay. It's crazy. And in Texas, the other difficulty is they have a new law that they put in last year that basically states that if you have, if you're going to talk about something that's happening, like climate change, then you also have to present arguments to say that climate change isn't happening. And some teachers asked their director of instruction, which they recorded and put out into the press. And so somebody said, well, how about the Holocaust? He says, yeah, you have to do that too. If somebody says that the Holocaust happened, then you have to present arguments to say that the Holocaust hasn't happened. So that's as crazy as it's getting in the United States. And hopefully we won't be at a point like that here in Canada. where that will happen. The amazing thing that happened here in BC is going all the way up from the Minister of Education, going all the way down to the schools. Everybody was in support of protecting the rights of LGBTQ kids and trans kids in our schools, and the materials that go with it, and material that explain that we do have alternate families, and it's important for us. The other thing that BC also did is they reinforced their human right laws here in BC to protect the LGBTQ community, and that's in their document that they released, specifically states that. So they said, take us on, but we are going to fight this. So when everybody's on side on this, again, I'm hopeful that the same thing's happening in everywhere else that I hear about, except Alberta. I'm hoping that Alberta won't go down. I mean, they have a new premier who's really much into conspiracy theories and who seems to have a lot of beliefs of what's happening in the United States. We'll have to wait and see what happens. She has yet to get elected. We'll have to wait and see when she's the premier in place in the legislature.
Don't say that.
Alvin, you have our sympathies.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Richard before he leaves? He has a granddaughter out there he probably needs to attend
It
to.
was story time. She's 2 years old and she's learned how to use a phone and kind of get me on FaceTime now.
Okay, so any other questions? Well, thank you,
Deb, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank Richard for his outstanding leadership on all of these myriad issues of intellectual freedom, not only in schools and school libraries, but in his more general capacity as intellectual freedom chair for the Canadian Federation of Library Associations.
Thank you, Alvin.
Thank you, Alvin. That's definitely earned.
Yes.
Richard is ending his stint with the CFLA IFC at the end of this year, and we'll certainly miss him.
Yeah. Yes.
Francis.
I'd just like to say thank you very much. It was a very interesting presentation. And coming from somebody who doesn't know the field of school librarianship at all, I found it quite informative. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm off. I'll let you continue your conference. I have to go teach.
Okay. See you soon, Richard.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. So that concludes our conference. Yes, Francis.
And I'd like to say thank you to you, Deb, for organizing it and the harrowing experience of having to do a conference and do it online. It was very well done. Thank you for the day.
Susan Ibbotson. Yes, you just need to unmute yourself there. Should be your lower left-hand corner.
Or the upper right hand.
Oh, yeah, okay. You got it? Anything else while Susan's finding the unmute? Okay, we'll give her another minute here to.
I believe it's done.
There we are. We can hear you. Did you have something to share?
No, I didn't, sorry.
Okay, I thought I saw your hand up there.
Other than to say thank you very much. Well done.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
A vast amount of information.
Yes, I'm still getting my feet under me with actually hosting a conference. So a few things weren't totally smooth, but I'm working on it.
Good. Thank you.
Any other final comments? If not, then I will send you off on the rest of your day. There's more of mine left than yours, but carry on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.